Welcome back. I've done a little more work on the T5 242 project. I've been busy, haven't got a haircut still, but I've been moving forward on a lot of little things that I've been checking off the list. So I thought I'd kind of go over that with you and kind of where I'm headed and problems, issues, success, failure, all that good stuff. Get into it. So I kind of want to do this one more like a vlogging style. Mostly know that I'm not a huge fan of vlogging, but I think in this case it's probably going to work best just because I got a lot of little stuff to go over and it's kind of hard to like throw some edits in there and make it kind of interesting to watch. So it's going to be mostly me pointing at the camera and pointing at things and saying I did this and I need to do that. So hopefully you can bear with me and at least get to the meat of the interesting stuff. But yeah, we'll kind of go start at the front and work our way around. Starting at the very front, we've got a 940 NA radiator sitting in there. They're quite a bit bigger than the 240 radiators, and they come with a nice electric fan, which I'm going to use. Had to modify the top, I guess, clips, supports, restraints a little bit, and then also down on the lower rad support I actually had to cut and notch it to get it sitting down enough that it was not going to interfere with the hood, because this car is getting a flat hood. The coffin hoods have a little more clearance, but I don't want one of those. Intercooler is just kind of sitting there, just mocked up kind of where I have to go, and that's one of the next big problems because I also have a AC condenser that I have to deal with. I've got a universal one there and a stock Volvo one. I'm not sure which one I'm going to use, but I have to kind of get my placement and stack thickness and everything like that figured out. You can see on this side there's really not a lot of room because I've got my intercooler inlet. Intercooler outlet on the other side is going to come out around the battery tray. But I also have my condenser in and out. So you've got your hot gas in and then your condensed liquid out that goes off into your evaporator and all the rest of the inside air conditioning equipment, because I'm stubborn and I want AC. So yeah, not a lot of room to work in there. Got a bunch of aluminum and stainless and rubber 90s and straight lengths and coupling. I'm going to try and do all my charge piping out of stainless just because I think it looks neater. I'm not a very good stainless welder, so it might end up looking like crap. These aluminum 90s I got because I'm actually going to cut them as short as possible and weld them to the intercooler because I have such a tight bend to get under the battery tray and around from the core support and everything else like that. So I've got to weld those on, cut up my good intercooler, and then yeah, start directing the compressed air. So that should be fun, but I can't really do that until I get the intercooler mounted, and I can't do that until I get the condenser mounted. And I can't mount the condenser until I'm sure that my air conditioning lines to and from the compressor and the evaporator in the cabin are going to fit. So we'll have to go back a few steps before I get to this. Next big thing is I've got the intake manifold pretty much completed. Starting at the top, we've got the stock 5-cylinder fuel rail. I've modified it so I have an AN in and out on both sides of it. All the other holes have been plugged up so I can use a traditional style fuel pressure regulator. I'm also running flex fuel, so I have a little GM flex fuel sensor, and I made a little bracket. So that's all tidied up there. I just have to finish running the supply and return lines under the car. Looking at the intake, this was an RN intake off the newer 5-cylinders. The older 5-cylinders has the throttle body pointing that way. Obviously that's not going to work for putting one of these rear wheel drive configurations. So the RN intakes, the newer ones, have it off the bottom, and you can't really see it down there. I'll throw some pictures in if I can. overlay them in the video. But there's just a generic eBay throttle body that I've converted because these intakes were drive-by-wire. There's an idle air motor on there as well. All that's going to be controlled by the Mega Squirt, but I want it to have, you know, good cold start and idle up for air when the air conditioning comes on and all that stuff. So you need an idle air motor to do that. And what else have we got? Oh, power steering lines, that's done. I actually had to modify the intake on the bottom. I'll throw a picture in there to clear the return of the power steering reservoir. The supply of it, I just added JIC fittings to the steel lines and then just got a high pressure hose made at the hydraulic shop. So that's pretty easy stuff. It's tied down in the rack there, but not too complicated as far as that stuff's concerned. On the top of the engine, I am going coil on plug, or in this case, coil near plug. I still want to have the factory Volvo valve cover, I guess, little fancy thing there. 20 valves, there you go, 5-cylinder. So I'm going to use LS truck coils. I made a little bracket that bolts to the top of the firewall bulkhead here. And then actually all of the original plug wires that usually go into the distributor, it's at the back there, those fit perfectly onto the towers of the LS truck coils. So that was kind of neat. I don't need custom plug wires. And they should be plenty hot for what I'm doing. Obviously you have to configure them in the Mega Squirt with the firing order of the 5-cylinder. That's nothing too crazy. I'll cross that bridge when I get there. But I was pretty happy because that solved a bunch of problems. One, I wanted, you know, good spark. Two, the distributor on the back of these motors goes right into the firewall, so you can't really run one. You have to go coil on plug, or I think some people have made a thing to drive it off the front of the cams, but I think that looks really ugly, and then you still got an old school distributor, so not what I wanted to do. So yeah, coil on plug hopefully should work pretty good. Coil near plug. Everyone's probably seen the turbo hanging on there. This is not permanent. This is just what I've done for mocking up my turbo placement because I'm going to build a custom exhaust manifold for it. That's a TO4E, just a generic eBay knockoff turbo. I think it's about a 0.8 AR hot side. I can't remember the compressor housing specs, but anyways, it should be good for around 450 horsepower. I'm worried that the hot side might be a little tight, but you can mix and match with these turbos pretty easily. It's old 80s Garrett Tech knockoff stuff, so there's a lot of different housings and stuff out there. So that's kind of sitting where I think is going to be the best location for getting into it. Down there's a mild steel flange, and then this header is going to be stainless, just 304L. A friend helped me make a mock-up of the collector, which kind of seems to be a stumbling point of 5-cylinder exhaust manifolds because it kind of ends up into a weird shape. Trying to get this into a T3 flange is not ideal. You'd be better off doing like a V-band turbine housing, but that's more money than I care to spend. So we ended up with that. I'm actually going to have a 2-inch 90 off of that, and actually this collector is going to lay kind of like that underneath the turbo, and then the that's gone forever. It'll lay underneath like that, and then there'll be a 90 up into the inlet of the turbine housing, but then also on that 90 will give me a spot for my external wastegate, because I want to run an external wastegate. I like the boost control, and I like the noises they make when they vent to atmosphere. So a little 3-inch V-band adapter on there. The downpipe, everything, full exhaust will be 3-inch, probably just mild steel and wrap it or coat it. But yeah, that bracket is many chops and cuts and adjustments later, and it is not staying on the car. I might actually make some kind of a cool support thing here to help take the weight of the turbo. I've seen those on a few cars, and I really like the look of them. It all depends on like how much hood clearance I have, which not a lot. So we'll see. But yeah, I don't know. It's looking good. Looks like something's done anyways on the front. radiator hoses. The lower one, that's kind of a hybrid of a 961 and an 851 that I've kind of grafted together to get the water pump inlet and the heater lines and everything else like that sorted out. Top and bottom rad hoses are just 961s. Trim a little bit of length on them and they fit perfect onto the 940 rad. So that was kind of nice. I can't remember where I got it from. It's a big drop sway bar, I think, modeled after the V6 drop sway bars. And you kind of have to have it because there's this bump in the sump, which is for the oil pump tube, and also the oil filter hangs out right there. Not a huge amount of room there. I'm probably going to have to put some kind of a remote filter adapter on it, which isn't a huge deal. But if you want to run a sway bar with the 5-cylinder, this is kind of your only option. But yeah, it was some group buy on Turbo Bricks years ago. I got that from. They did a run of them. I don't know if there's any more available. You might be best off looking for a V6 one in the junkyard. Also converted the clutch to a hydraulic push style master cylinder. That's just a generic Wilwood, I think 3/4 bore. It's not too hard to do it on these cars. I did it on my LS car. I've helped a few other friends do it when they want to run a hydraulic clutch setup. The T5 trans that I'm using, I'm going to have like an internal hydraulic slave. So that's not too complex. Inside, you have to do a little bit of tweaking. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get a decent shot here, but you can see the clutch pedal. And that's where the master cylinder comes in. But you have to extend this pedal because you actually move it up into a different pivot point so it pushes rather than pulls like when it was the factory cable setup. But if you have it in your hand, it makes perfect sense and it's not too hard to tackle. So that's another thing off the list. We'll just get a like a braided dash 4 hose made to the internal slave cylinder, and then have a nice hydraulic clutch setup, which they drive so much better than cable. Moving on to the inside. I apologize guys if it's kind of dark in here. I'm always struggling to try and get light so you can see what I'm doing. I've got the R-Sport cluster in, just mocked in there, nothing's wired, but there's a fellow in Norway that does like a 3D printed adapter, because this is the late model 240 dash and the early model 240 dash was kind of what those R-Sport gauges were made to fit. So he does this really cool 3D printed one, and it sits in there, and it's a nice fit and finish. I'm super happy with how that turned out, and still got the GT little auxiliary gauges there, factory radio, everything I'm trying to keep factory in here. I did flock the dash just to cover some cracks and everything else like that. For a first attempt it turned out okay. I do have this old Lucara steering wheel that I'm going to try and adapt in here, but the problem with this one is the boss that it came with is super shallow, so it's, your knuckles are pretty much in the dash, so I'm going to have to make some kind of a spacer to get it into a reasonable position for your hands and arms to grab, but I'm going to wait till I have the seat installed before I figure that one out. That's about all there is in here. I have a wink mirror. Those were kind of a cool 80s thing at the time, that goes up, you know, all the way across there, race car stuff. So I might try and mount that. I've got one in my other car and I really like it. And that's about it in here. It's all going to be mostly factory stuff with just a few little tweaks here and there. I still got to decide where I want to put my wideband and boost gauge. I'm going to try and maybe find some factory Volvo looking stuff, or maybe I'll hide it in the glove box, or, you know, something like that. Keep it looking sleeper-ish. But yeah, happy with how this has turned out. So underneath the car, built some motor mounts and a transmission mount. It was pretty easy. I was just able to modify the stock transmission crossmember and added a little bracket to pick up a T5. The front motor mounts are just some generic leaf spring bushing, leaf spring shackle bushings, I guess, and some pipe. I was keen on trying to get the oil pan above the cross member. It's very close to being level. But unfortunately, in doing that, the pinion angle to get the proper driveline angle that I'm after, because I'm using a one-piece drive shaft, it ended up with the output of the transmission quite close to the transmission tunnel. So I'm probably going to have to do some clearancing or cutting or hammering or something to be able to get a drive shaft in there without rubbing on anything. And you know, I could have compromised and dropped the engine lower, but then that cast aluminum oil pan is the first things that's going to hit the road, and I don't want that. This isn't a Volkswagen or an E30 BMW. We don't want broken oil pan issues. So yeah, that's one more issue. It'll just be a custom one-piece drive shaft with adapters to tie into the Ford 8.8. As far as the rear end's concerned, I'm probably going to do another Ford 8.8 swap. This is from like a 96 or 7 Ford Explorer. So it's got the disc brakes, 31 spline axles, and a nice limited slip. I did the same rear end in my LS 245. You chop and narrow the passenger side axle tube, and then, I mean, if you're in the States where these things are a million dime a dozen, you just go and get another short side axle shaft and bung it in. If you're me in Canada, where everyone wants $1 million for these, you just order another axle shaft off Rock Auto. I got this one for $200, which I thought was a screaming deal. Usually it's $400 or $500 or $600. There was a little bit of pinion backlash, and I was like, oh, you know, maybe it's just a crush sleeve or something. You can kind of hear it there. Pop the cover off. The fellow I bought it from didn't know anything about it, so I'm not going to give him a blast, but if you can see that carrier moving back and forth, took it out, and yeah, the carrier bearings are shot, like the rollers are pitted and falling apart. So it needs a rebuild. That's what you get for $250 or $200. I rolled the dice, and you win some, you lose some, but it's still, at least where I am, the cheapest option for getting a nice strong axle with a limited slip under one of these cars. I know you can get a torsion type limited slip for the Volvo 1031, and you can get chromoly axle shafts and all that, and they're quite strong. These axles are really quite good in these cars, but in my case, you know, that's probably going to be upwards of $2,000 to do that with the stock Volvo axle. Or you get one of these. Hopefully you don't have to rebuild it. In my case, still rebuild it. So say I'm $500 into the axle. I've got a set of weld-on mounts from Giffen's Performance with nice spherical bearings that tie into the trailing arms. And you do your chop and narrow, which, if you know, your time is free, depending on how much you value your time. Mine's worthless, but anyways, you know, a day here or there to get it under the car, and then you have a nice strong limited slip. It has a vehicle speed sensor, you know, disc brakes, all that good stuff. They're super strong. You can get aftermarket gear sets and everything, no problem. Like I said, for me and my location, it's kind of the best option. And also converts it to 5x114 in the back right away, which works for the wheels I've got. And then I just have to worry about the front. One of the things I was really keen on was keeping kind of an 80s vibe, and I scored these Ozcam turbo rims years ago. Another good friend kind of put me onto them, and I found them in a back shed. I paid $400 for all of them. They're not in the greatest shape. There is some pitting and corrosion on the inner lips that I'm going to have to take care of, but they're a true 3-piece, super cool rim. I think they were actually offered by IPD in the 80s in the catalog. These ones are actually 5x114 for whatever weird reason. So I have to run adapters, but I'm probably doing a Ford 8.8 swap. So that takes care of the back bolt pattern already. And then I'll have to run spacers or re-drill the front hubs to make it work. But that's a minor issue for running some cool rims. They're only 7 inches wide. I might try and get some different lips and go a bit deeper. But yeah, I think those definitely have to stay on the car. I've got some Autostradas as well, a full set of those, but there's a couple different offsets and lips and barrels need adjusting, and they're kind of 80s too, but I think these are the ticket. 15s on these cars, you know, with a decent tire profile. they just look cool, you know. Yeah, those are sick. Brakes for now are stock, but those are not staying. This is a 81 242, so it actually has the non-vented front rotors. I'll be converting it to the vented rotors, probably even get some cross-drilled and slotted rotors and some good brake pads on these stock calipers. I was thinking a big brake kit, but the problem with those 15-inch Ozcam wheels that I have is there's not a lot of room underneath the wheel to fit a big diameter rotor or bigger caliper. So for the power level of this car and how I'm planning on driving it, just as kind of a nice street cruiser with maybe the occasional track day, these stock brakes will be fine. I don't think I'm going to run into any issues with running out of stopping power or brake fade. But I know there is other options for upgrading the calipers and still keeping a small underwheel profile. So we'll see. That's plan A. As I mentioned before, I still have to run the fuel lines under the car. I'm going there and back with -6 PTFE Teflon line because you saw the flex fuel sensor. So this car will have the option to run on E85. I'm going to delete all the undercar pump setup and the lift pump setup in the tank that these cars came with. Well, actually this car was carbureted and then it was diesel swap. So anyways, it never had pumps in the tank. But I did it on my last car as well. You add a pump in-tank pump. So this is a nice E85 friendly one. If it focused, that would be cool, but I don't think it's going to. Wow, that's terrible. So in-tank pump, delete all the stuff under the car. I braze on fittings to convert this to -6 AN. There's a way you can join these to steel safely. You can TIG weld them on if you have steel AN fittings. I have a different method of doing it, which I'll go over with later. I'm sure people will tell me it's dangerous and unsafe, but I've done it on a lot of fuel injected cars and never had an issue. It's just like anything else. Use your brain and be smart about it. Under the car, I'll still keep the inline filter, the factory filter. I might change. I got to make sure that this is E85 friendly, which I think they're a paper element and they might not be. So it might change to a stainless one, but it'll be just under the car, up to the rail, back from the rail, through the reg, flex fuel sensor. I am going to use a fuel pressure sensor as well on the regulator just to monitor that, so that if I have a problem with any of my fuel delivery system, it will shut down and protect the engine, or at least let me know about it. But yeah, that's one more project I have to tick off the list. But I actually don't mind making fuel lines. The PTFE stuff is actually, I find it's easier to work with than the braided rubber hose. Been playing with the reproduction Group A wing. I think I got it off Retro Turbo a few years ago. It's a nice piece. It's ABS, just primer for now. I'll paint it the same color as the body. I've had it on and off the car a million times trying to get like the perfect location for it. I've been going over pictures of the old Group A cars and stuff like that, trying to figure out where they had it. But I think this thing looks awesome. I definitely am putting it on the car just to add a little flair, all the downforce, because I'm sure that'll do a whole bunch. But no, it just looks cool. And I think with the earlier style trunks, they're more square, and the narrower taillights, it definitely just is like a perfect fit. I think I am going to change to the newer style bumpers though, the plastic ones. I think they look a little sleeker and more modern and kind of suit the rest of the look I'm going for. The big chrome chins, picnic tables, whatever people call them, I'm not really a huge fan of. So yeah, that's coming along, but a long way from worrying about that. First we got to make it run and drive and all the mechanical stuff. Something else I show just because I'm here in the shop and it's sitting right in front of me. This is a Penta Marine AQ171C. So that's a factory 2.5 liter forged crank 16 valve marine engine. I think they're about 170 horse, and I know the 16 valve car engines were 160. someone probably correct me on that. But anyways, this came up. There was actually two of them. One was seized. This one turns over fine. I haven't done a compression test on it yet. The other one, the pistons were seized so bad in the bore that I pretty much had to abandon it. I got the crank out of it and a few other parts. This one is good. I have no idea what I'm going to do with it, but they came up for a price that I couldn't say no. But if anyone is interested in this or wants a little more detail about it, let me know. I'm kind of, over the red block stuff, but the 16 valve 2.5 liter is kind of intrigues me. That would be a neat motor to put in something, maybe keep it NA or maybe just a little bit of boost, and it'd be pretty fun. Well, that's pretty much where I'm at as of right now. I've been picking away on this slowly. It's summertime. I've got a million other projects on the go. I've been helping other people with their cars, working around the house. You know how it goes. Hopefully in the fall and winter, I'll have a bit more time to put in on this. Just going over all the stuff I have left to do with you guys kind of overwhelms me a little bit, but you just kind of pick a thing, do that, cross it off the list, go to the next. That's how I have to do it anyways. So it feels good to cross one or two things off the list a week. I haven't been doing that, but hopefully this will give me a little more motivation to get out there and keep going. Hopefully you enjoyed, and I should have some other stuff coming in the works as well. There's a couple other cars and projects that I want to do, like little walkarounds and overviews of, so I kind of like doing those ones. They're a little bit easier to crank out. Fabrication stuff takes time, so I'll just keep putting in the time and document along the way, and hopefully you enjoy. Thanks for now. See you later.